We're going over System Pticha, Preface to the Wisdom of Kabbalah by Bala Sulam, Chapter 2, 5 Discernments in the Masach. Session 11, the phases, levels of coarseness. Process of the vessel.
Process of the vessel, Balaha Salam, item 19. We have already explained that the first three discernments are not considered a Kli, vessel, but only Behina Dalet, phase 4, is considered a Kli, vessel. Still, because the first three discernments are its causes and induce the completion of Behina Dalet, phase 4, once Behina Dalet, phase 4 is completed, 4 measures are registered in its quality of reception. Explanation, item 19. We have already explained that the first three phases, humanity, spiritual society, and group, are still not considered a complete desire for crossing the barrier, but only phase 4, individual, is considered a complete desire, vessel. Still, because the first three phases are its cause and induce the completion of the phase 4, once phase 4 is completed, 4 measures are registered in its quality of perception.
Process of the vessel. Explanation. Item 19. We have already explained that the first three phases, humanity, spiritual society, and the group, are still not considered a complete desire for crossing the barrier, but only phase 4, individual, is considered a complete desire, vessel. Still, because the first three phases are its causes and induce the completion of phase 4, once phase 4 is completed, 4 measures are registered in its quality of perception. So what we can see here in phase 1, you start with phase 1, which is humanity. And then when you reach phase 2, which is spiritual society, you still have phase 1, which is humanity, within it. And then when you reach phase 3, which is the group, you still have humanity and spiritual society within you. It's layered on top of each other. And then finally, with phase 4, individual, you have humanity, spiritual society, and group. And then on top of it is layered phase 4, individual phase. So basically the idea is that it's not like we are switching between the phases. Rather, each time we add a new layer on top, and we have to take care of all the desires of humanity and also the desires of spiritual society and the desires of the group and the desires of the individual.
I think I have a feeling that, I mean, I pretty much know, but I don't know how to exactly phrase it, but it feels like each stage is some kind of response to the previous one, in the sense that it is a negation of the last stage or any combination of the previous stages. A, is that true? B, if that's true, can we reflect how, for example, stage 3 is type of negation of phase 3 is a type of negation of phase 1 or phase 2, or one of them impartial, and so forth?
Yeah, so it is true. So for example, in humanity, it's about dealing with the corporeal desires of the person. And even if they're doing, good acts, they're basically to make the person feel better with himself. When you reach phase 2, the spiritual society, this is when they negate the ego within them. And the focus is on the point in the heart, and they either ignore their ego or try to go on top of it and basically not use it, but rather go above it. They want to go above the ego. They want to focus on the point in the heart and not focus on the ego, which is in that state. It's the humanity part within them. Then when they reach phase 3 negates phase 2 in saying that the ego wasn't created for nothing, and it wasn't just created to go on top of it, but actually it was created for use. It was actually created to give birth to the point in the heart. So just because the point in the heart is inside the ego, you can't just focus on the point in the heart. Since it's not powerful enough, you have to use the ego, which is like the womb, and you have to birth the point in the heart outside of the ego. So phase 3 moves towards that direction of actually giving or starting to give the ego a prominent position in spiritual advancement and not just treating it as just the corporeal desires. And phase 4, the individual phase, completes that and completes it on a more intense level, on an individual level, and not just as a group as we all share together discernments, but rather it adds the layer on of working with an individual one-on-one and getting discernments that relate specifically to the person and not just general concepts of the wisdom, cleaning concepts, and so forth. So you can see how phase 2 towards phase 1, there's a direct opposition there. With phase 3 to phase 2, the opposition is not about the point in the heart. The opposition is in the use of the ego. And then phase 4 just continues that. So between phase 4 and phase 3, there isn't much distance as there is between phase 3 and phase 2, and isn't much distance as phase 2 and phase 1. So between the spiritual society and humanity, there's the biggest distance. Where the spiritual societies were only meant to bestow, and humanities that were mostly meant to receive. Phase 3 just changes the direction of bestowal from external to internal. And then phase 4 intensifies it, using the ego to its completion.
Would the following be right if I'm talking in different contexts? That we have Chokhmah, which is receiving. You have Binah, which is negating the receiving, which is bestow. Then we are in Binah, meaning we are in a state of bestowal. And as you said, we acknowledge that we're stuck here if we don't allow the ego, so we gradually allow it in. And that's phase 3, where you have the light of
mercy.
Yeah, the light of mercy with some
illumination of Chokhmah. Illumination
of Chokhmah. And then the Chokhmah grows and grows and grows to the point that you have, this is the part that I'm not so sure about, but it seems to me like you have, like the Chokhmah swallows the bestowed part, and it turns into the light of Chokhmah with the light of the mercy in it. I'm not sure about the last one.
So the way it works is phase 1, humanity, we refer it to the light of wisdom because it's all about reception. It wants to receive pleasure. Phase 2 wants to use the light of mercy. And when I say wants to, it means it doesn't actually get it yet. It just wants to use the light of mercy. And that desire to overcome their inclination of just receiving, that's considered phase 2. So just the desire to overcome their inclination of receiving is the spiritual society. The group is actually when you have successfully received the light of mercy, you actually start to have alignment to the system through cleaning concepts. And you've got an illumination of wisdom because you started to reawaken your ego for spiritual development. So unlike in humanity phase, where the ego wasn't even used for spiritual development, in phase 3, in the group phase, you're actually using your ego for your spiritual development. And you're still dealing with the bestowal of phase 2, which is bestowing, like doing actions, doing sort of helping others and so forth. In phase 4, you're focusing only on yourself. You're focusing only on you as an individual. And you're focusing on your desire to cross the barrier, and you're less interested in helping others, or should be less interested in helping others cross the barrier. And you should be focused only on yourself crossing the barrier, and that should be the utmost importance. That is, once you cross the barrier, then you can help others. But the most important part is for you to cross the barrier, and that's using the full egoism, not actually sort of caring, you could say, about others' spiritual advancement or corporeal pleasure. You're just so focused on your spiritual advancement, your egoistic spiritual advancement. Levels of coarseness.
Levels of coarseness. Baal HaSalam. Bihina Aleph, phase 1. In it is the slightest measure of the quality of reception. Bihina Bet, phase 2, is somewhat thicker, having more aviyut, coarseness, than Bihina Aleph, phase 1, in terms of its quality of reception. Bihina Gimel, phase 3, is thicker than Bihina Bet, phase 2, in its quality of reception. And finally, Bihina Dalet, phase 4, is the thickest of all, and its quality of reception is perfect in every way. We should also discern that the root of the 4 Behinat phases, plural for Bihina, phase, which is the purest of them all, is included in it too. Explanation. Phase 1, humanity, is the slightest measure of the quality of egoism. Phase 2, spiritual society, has more desire than phase 1, humanity, in terms of their quality of egoism. Phase 3, group, is more egoistic than phase 2, spiritual society. Phase 4, individual, is the most egotistical phase of all and perfectly designed for crossing the spiritual barrier. Root phase is the least egoistic phase, representing the preparation for our physical lives.
Levels of coarseness. Explanation. Phase 1, humanity, is the slightest explanation. Phase 1, humanity, is the slightest measure of the quality of egoism. Phase 2, spiritual society, has more desire than phase 1, humanity, in terms of their quality of egoism. Phase 3, group, is more egoistic than phase 2, spiritual society. Phase 4, individual, is the most egotistical phase of all, and perfectly designed for crossing the spiritual barrier. Root phase is the least egoistic phase, representing the preparation for our physical lives. So what we have here is we have a scale of less egoism to more egoism. And in the root phase, in the preparation, this is basically representing the phase that brings us into birth in physical reality. In phase 1, humanity, our egoism is only used for corporeal endeavors. And even when the point in the heart is activated and you would expect some kind of spiritual direction, because in that phase the egoism is very, very small, the spirituality gets downgraded into a physical form of physical actions, or getting enjoyment from the language of Kabbalah, or how beautiful the Zohar is. All those feelings are still corporeal emotions, even though the people might think that they're spiritual. When you reach phase 2, spiritual society, that is already not focusing on the material of Kabbalah or what actions you do. Rather, it's dealing with the connection between people. It's dealing with the human behavior. So it's already a level above just the material or just the beauty of the works of Kabbalah or Zohar. In phase 3, the group, that's when the egoism takes on a spiritual direction. That is, you're now using your egoism for advancing. In phase 2, you're going above your egoism, you're just using your point in the heart, which doesn't have much energy in it at all. In phase 3, you're actually using the egoism in the direction for spirituality, which what it was designed for in the first place. And then phase 4, individual, takes that to the extreme and understands that's exactly what the egoism was designed for. And the size of the egoism is meant to match the complete desire need to actually cross the barrier, and that completes the growth of the egoism. So you're going from less egoism, which is coarseness, which is passive, all the way down to more egoism, which is coarseness and active.
So my question, when we're talking about egoism, this is egoism not for material gain, but rather egoism for spiritual, purposes of crossing the barrier, right?
Which phase are you talking about?
Well, I'm talking about the definition of egoism here in general. To me, this means egoism of crossing the barrier, a desire to cross the barrier, not egoism to have material gain. Somebody
in phase 1,
in phase 4. Mm-hmm.
In phase 1 in humanity, your egoism is not for spiritual gain. It's for corporeal gain.
Right. Yeah.
In phase 4, the egoism is for spiritual gain.
But the guy, how how do you compare a guy? Okay, let's just say this: a guy, let's say like Donald Trump, has got super high egoism for money and honor and all that. And compared to he's phase one, compared to a guy who's in phase four, who's got a higher egoism, but his money, power, or knowledge, he's got an egoism for spirituality and crossing the barrier. In what are we comparing? Just trying to find what is egoism here in general.
So the idea is egoism is like a force, right? Egoism is the power to satisfy yourself. And this self-satisfaction can come from two sources. It can either come from externality, which is reality, or it can come from internality, which is perception, which is internal power. So if you've got a small egoism, you basically fall into reality and you want to make success in what you see in your reality through your five senses. And that is what you want to be successful in. You want to have a job, and you want to have a family, and you want to have money, and you want to have power over others, and you want to be knowledgeable and successful in corporeal endeavors, right? In reality. When your egoism increases, what that does is it actually brings you deeper into yourself. So instead of trying to fill desires that society gives you, now you're trying to fulfill desires of yourself, your inner lack for internal power, your inner lack for control over your life. So it's not about filling desires that society dictates for you, which are given through reality. Rather, it's sort of zoning in and doing what you really need, which is control of yourself. And then the result of control of yourself will also be that you'll able to, successfully afterwards, using expression, get the corporeal desires filled, but they're a result of your internal power and not the other way around. So when you have a small ego, you're basically dealing with the desires that your environment dictates to you. And as you become more egotistical, you're focusing more on your own desires that are independent of the desires that society gives you.
What does it mean, control of yourself?
When I'm filling desires of society, for example, society dictates that, if you don't have a job, then you're a failure. If you don't have a family, you're a failure. And it depends, of course, which society you're in. But those desires, what defines the success is what the society defines as success, not what you define as success. Because those desires don't exist if there's not a society. But this inner need for control of self, of understanding ourselves, or understanding our root, understanding our internal power, understanding the creator within us, how we're controlled, how our lives are dictated, all those desires have got nothing to do with society. In fact, society mostly says to ignore those kind of interactions and focus more on making the society a better place and being successful in society. So if you're zoning in more into yourself, those desires are independent of society. And you're focusing on, how can I align to myself? That is, when a person is either before the barrier or let's say in a shell, they don't even understand what they're saying. They'll say one thing. People say, is this what you said? And you'll be like, no, I didn't say that. But if you recorded it, you would hear exactly what the person said, that they said something that they didn't think that they said. They don't even have control over the words they say. They don't even know what they're saying. The idea of control of self is to get to a point where you know what you're saying. You know what you're meaning. And you know, and sort of you're more connected to how other people will understand you as well. Where if you're not in that state, let's say because you're before the barrier or in a shell, you're just not connected to yourself. You don't understand. You're saying, I like chocolate, and you're saying, I like chocolate. And people are saying, so you like chocolate? You're like, no, I don't like chocolate. I like vanilla. And they're like, so you like vanilla? It's like, yeah, I like vanilla. It's like you said before and you like chocolate. I didn't say I like chocolate. And so the person doesn't understand how their thoughts and their emotions aren't aligned to, let's say, the words that are coming out of their mouth. So the idea of aligning to yourself is aligning to yourself without relation with society at all. It's to zone into yourself and understand yourself. Once you've understood yourself and you're aligned to yourself, then you can start, filling various desires that society provides. It's not that it's bad, it's very important. But there needs to be a priority where you first align with yourself and then you can align with your society, not the other way around.
But I'll just add, isn't it natural that sort of environments influence you? Society influences you. It's almost subconscious. It's almost happens without you being aware of it. I mean, that's why it's so important to be in the right environment. But we do live in reality, and we live in there's social norms and things like that. They do have influence on you. How do we deal with that? I mean, that's there, you know what I mean?
And there's no problem with that. But the idea is to be aware of it and be conscious about it and decide the degree of control you're going to let it have over you. It's sort of, the idea is to not allow society to control you, rather to agree on how much you want to be controlled by society. And the difference is that when you're letting society control you, then you're passive. Your coarseness is passive. When you're dictating how much society will have control over you, that's already an active egoism. It's like the difference between someone being kidnapped or someone going on a bus, right? If you're being kidnapped, it's against your will. But if you're going on a bus, it's not against your will, but you're like, but you're not driving, the driver's driving. Yeah, but I'm agreeing with letting somebody else be in control. So the idea is that changes the whole control mechanism. So the whole difference between someone kidnapping you and someone taking you to the destination that you want is whether you're agreeing with them taking you there. And if suddenly in the middle you suddenly disagree, it suddenly turns into a kidnapping. So the only difference between a situation where you don't have control and a situation where you do have control is whether you're agreeing with it and accepting it. So the whole idea of internally aligning with yourself is to be aware of what's happening with you and what desires are pulling you, and to accept them and learn how to agree with them and decide how much you can agree with them and decide how much society is going to have an effect on you. And that is the power of self, the power of control of self. That is, we want society to affect us. But the idea is that we want to be aware of how society is affecting us and then choose the measure of how much we want society to affect us. Just like in our spiritual advancement, we need the environment to affect us. We need, let's say, the group or the spiritual society or the individuals to affect us. But the idea is to get to a point where you decide how much they affect you. And you decide, are you going to be passive about it, or are you going to be active? Are you going to actually go to the individual and ask for help? Or are you just going to wait for the individual to come to you? And that having the control of how much you're going to be passive, because you don't always want to be active, right? If you're always active, then you're also not in control. The control is to decide how much you want to be passively controlled by the environment and how much you want to be actively controlled by the environment. And that control mechanism is internal power.
You begin to learn this, or the potential of it before the barrier, and then develop it more afterwards?
Exactly. Five discernments of reception.
The 5 discernments of reception. Baal Salam. These are the 5 discernments of reception contained in Pchinat Dalet, phase 4, which are called by the names of the 10 Sefirot emanations: Kachap, Keter, crown; Chochmah, wisdom; Bina, understanding; Tiferet, Malchut, beauty, kingdom, included in Pchinat Dalet, phase 4, since the 4 phases of Chaptum, wisdom, understanding, beauty, and kingdom, and the root is called Keter, crown. Explanation. These are the 5 subphases of phase 4, which are called by the names of the 10 emanations, collapsed into the following emanations: crown, wisdom, understanding, beauty, kingdom, included in phase 4, individual, since the 4 phases are wisdom, understanding, beauty, kingdom, and the root is called crown.
5 discernments of reception. Explanation. These are the 5 subphases of reception, phase 4, which are called by the names of the 10 emanations collapsed into the following emanations: crown, wisdom, understanding, beauty, and kingdom, included in phase 4, individual. Since the 4 phases are wisdom, understanding, beauty, and kingdom, and the root is called crown. So what we can see here is that when we reach that final phase before crossing the barrier, we have within us the phases that we went through before, so they're not lost. So our preparation, that sort of, you could say, all the information, all the preparation that decided, what environment we were going to be born into, who's our parents, our DNA, all different information like that is in the root phase, in the catch of the crown. It represents that initial creator that created us. Then you've got Chokhmah, wisdom, which is phase 1, which is the humanity within you. Then you've got Bina, understanding, phase 2, which is the spiritual society within you. Then you've got Tiferet, beauty, phase 3, which is the group within you. And then finally, Malchut, kingdom, phase 4, which is the individual within you. So inside the individual, you have the individual within the individual. And this is what we work with after the barrier. This is this phase 4 where we put a screen on top of it and then decide how we're going to relate and operate with our desires that we've integrated within us. So these desires are no longer outside of us, which would then dictate that we have no effect over them. We're dealing with the desires within us, and therefore we do actually have some kind of control over it.
So making it practical, what I take from it is that everything, underlying the word everything, that we perceive is comprised of the 10 subsets of dimensions of reception. Is that right? Perception.
Yeah.
And it's the combination of them all together.
Exactly. We have, in our reality, we have all these parts within us. We have the preparation, we have the humanity, we have the spiritual society, the group, the individual, and they're like circles layering on top of each other. And then we have the individual in the middle, which is looking out at the group, which is looking out at the spiritual society, which is looking out at humanity and looking out on all the past. One of the interesting points is that phase 1 and phase 2 are fascinated by the past. They're fascinated by the crown. They're fascinated by the preparation. What happened before they were born? What happened, at the time of Moshe or the Ari or Adam Rishon or the Big Bang or how the world's cascaded down. They're so interested in the past. But phase 3 and phase 4, which is the group and the individual, they don't actually care much about the past. They care about the future. They're directed towards the future. They actually want to become the crown. They want to become the Keter. They want to become the emanator and get the primacy of the creator. So you can see the split where phase 2 and phase 1 are sort of looking towards the past, while phase 3 and phase 4 are looking towards the future. All right, I guess we'll stop here and enter the after party.